me express my thanks and delight of having this opportunity to share with you on this occasion and engage in meaningful dialogue. Regret that we're a few minutes late. We've been in the area driving around, touring for quite a while, so we finally arrived here. I want to thank Giallo for his steadfastness, for his courage in the face of challenges. He'll get his stars from his scars. He is a man that you should all look to in the future for one whose example of suffering and sacrifice will ultimately make all of us better. Give Giallo a big hand. Where are you? I want to talk for a few minutes with you today to open for some meaningful dialogue and so I want to open up the session today with some assessment of what I see and have gone through over these years, and to engage in some meaningful conversation with you as you grapple with one of the great challenges of our time. Because across the years, in places like Sweden, basically has been a monochrome society, one ethnic group society. Now as it becomes more global in its cultural relations, its education, its business affairs, its transportation, its social media, you have learned to survive apart, almost in a kind of heavenly isolation. Now, you have a bigger challenge than surviving apart, and that's now learning how to live together. Many languages, one message of humanity. Many languages, one message. Many faces, many races from many places, and yet the oneness of our humanity. In a real sense, if we see the world through a door and not through a keyhole, one half of the human race is Asian. Half of them are Chinese, and they're not behind a wall. 1/8 of the human race is African, 1/4 is Nigerian. You could put all of Europe and China and the US in Africa and have some land space left. If we got on the plane today, one of us at Kennedy Airport flying toward LA, and one flying toward Senegal, we get there about the same time. It's just that close. If you get down to Ghana, you're closer to New York than you are to South Africa. It's just that vast. In America, in North America, 2/3 of our hemisphere speak Spanish. Mexico, South, Central, and Latin America. The U.S. and the Russian republics, when they meet, that is 1/8 of the human race. That's a minority. There will not be many more meetings where the 1/8 determines what the 7/8 is going to do. Most people in the real world today are yellow, brown, black, non-Christian, poor, female, young, and don't speak English. In that world, education challenges us not just to know subject matter, but to cope with other people and to figure out how to not merely survive apart, but how to live together. There is this battle going on between hope and fear. Should we go forward by hope or backwards by fear? What was once a battle about the use of race and racism to justify exploitation from the slave trade onward. During those seasons, they declared racism to be the will of God, theologically. Racism was embraced by social scientists, by natural scientists, reinforced by law, politicians, and the media. All theories of racial supremacy have been discredited. We know that racism as a practice is illegal, immoral, unscientific, divisive, hurtful. Racism is a mental illness. So this virus must be discouraged at every level. What was essentially a divide on the false premise of race was always a cover for some form of justification for economic exploitation. Both race as the rationale being pushed further back, as it's being pushed further back, the economic divide becomes more apparent, the north-south gap between the surplus culture and the deficit culture. The gap between the wealthy, often born of government subsidy and protection, and the poor born of government neglect. The middle class being deserted in search of cheap labor markets abroad. The world remains gripped today in an economic crisis. The burden of globalization is upon us. European countries, once monochrome, are becoming multicultural. Stage A, you're in Africa, you're in Iraq and Pakistan, for some form of colonialism or exploitation, or occupation, as the case may be. Those who were colonized 50 years ago became immigrants, very close to indentured servants, who then became citizens, whose children want to become fully empowered to participate. The closer they get to us, the more we react to them. And so learning how to live with them becomes one of the challenges of your time. Old wineskins must make room for new wine. Population is shifting to wherever the grass is greener. One of the byproducts of war is not just that people are killed where the bombs are dropped, and injured where the bombs are dropped, and destabilization where the bombs are dropped, but drives immigration. People leave looking for greener grass where there's a more peaceful coexistence. In the real sense, in today's world, there are no more foreigners. We live in a one world order. There are no more foreigners. The winds of change are blowing. It challenges the raging wars that pours in the air. Too many bombs are falling. Too many youth killing youth. Too much poverty in the world of plenty and sufficiency. Joblessness giving rise to frustration. The world is changing. We must forget the scapegoating. There are no more foreigners. Oceans and mountains don't separate us anymore. We are connected to each other in real time. What affects one of us directly affects the rest of us indirectly and quickly. So as the globe warms and the waters rise, and the hurricanes become more violent, there are no national boundaries that matter in this age of one world community. Beyond legal safeguards, we've learned to live together. Whenever that happens, the worst of our fears are never realized. Europe experiencing today evolutions from slave trade to freedom. We will not get better by abuse and repression, by growing and becoming enlightened. Inclusion leads to growth. When there's growth, everybody wins. Too much concentrated wealth, too many expensive wars, and too much poverty. And thus a tension between those who have too much and those who have too little, and wars which cost lives, money, and honor. If the human body has too much blood concentrated in one place, it's called a clot. You get a stroke, you die. It must flow to make all parts of the body healthy and secure. So in our economic body, there must be a simple flow of resources that they might be shared. Let's talk about globalization. We've globalized capital and concentrated it. So when banks fall on Wall Street, the big rock falls in Britain, and banks around the world fall, because we've globalized capital. Closing plants, shifting jobs, looking for cheap labor markets to exploit. But in globalizing capital, we've not globalized human rights to keep up with the capital. We've not globalized workers' rights, women's rights, children's rights, environmental security. And thus, in the day's challenge, it is we must globalize fundamental relations. Just a couple of years ago, the Olympics were held in China. And often you hear the complaint about China having abundant and cheap labor and undermining the growing economies of the West. There were no complaints about the outcome of the athletic Olympics in China. Countries had spent much money investing in the athletes and in promoting the Olympics. Some won gold medals, some won silver, some won bronze. The winners won with grace. The losers lost with dignity. And in the end, all were rejoicing, none were afraid. What made the global athletic Olympics so intense in competition, with emotions riding so high? What made for the outcome to be so beautiful? A Jamaican won the dash, boat. From another country, someone won the swimming. Someone else won gymnast. Someone else basketball. What allowed for the world to converge on China? Engage in tough, competitive sport. It's all over, shake hands and leave. Because whether it is the Olympics or whether it's rugby or football, basketball, baseball, golf, tennis, or track, there's some characteristics that lend themselves to a kind of justice. I was in Detroit last week at a baseball game. The Detroit Tigers baseball team was 7 players from Dominican Republic, 3 from Venezuela. Playing was a pitcher from Japan, another from Cuba, another from Montgomery, Alabama. What allowed, whether in China and the Olympics of football, basketball, baseball, golf, tennis, what allows us to go to those events by the thousands and celebrate by the millions, accept the outcome in peace. And where the poorest among us can become the star. The Kenyans can be the world's greatest long-distance runners. What about the athletic scene that allows for this kind of camaraderie? Because whenever the playing field is even and the rules are public and the goals are clear and the referee is fair and there's transparency and no one gets points based upon inheritance, we can live with the outcome. There's no royal blood on the athletic field. There are no points based upon your religion, upon your skin complexion. On the field, we live in our faith. We live under the law. What we really want is equal protection under the law. It's the story of our civil rights struggle in the United States was fighting for an even playing field, equal protection under the law, and enforced. For so long, 246 years, we lived in legal slavery, unprotected by law. Another 100 years of legal Jim Crow, apartheid, unprotected by law. 54 decision, the law changed. Eventually, behavior changed, attitudes changed, and results changed when the playing field became even. In the real sense, in our struggle, the last 60 years, we've seen some dramatic changes. When my father's generation came to Europe in World War II, they fought in segregated by race armies. Back home, African-American soldiers sat behind Nazi prisoners of war on American military bases. The Nazis were the enemy, but at least they were white. How pervasive racism was within our own military bases. 1948 began to desegregate by law the soldiers. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled that apartheid was illegal. The law changed, but the culture didn't change. It took years to change the culture beyond the law. But most fundamental is the law change. The Montgomery bus boycott is seen as the big focus of the Montgomery movement when Dr. King emerged. But really, they were testing the law. In 1956, they won the legal decision. The segregation on buses was illegal. The law changed. In 1957 battle at Little Rock, black youth going to the white school of their choice, the most resourceful school of their choice, had to be taken in by the military about gaining equal protection under the law. Meantime, people learning to live together outside of their comfort zones. When you plant two seeds in the ground, you water them both. They have equal strength. You put a wall between them. One grows taller, stronger, more multiples of fruit. One is shorter and stunted. The taller one is not a better one. It had access to something called photosynthesis. It had sunlight. Those in the light grow taller than those in the shadows. When the walls come down, we all share the sunlight, which none of us originated, and we all grow. Inclusion leads to growth. When there's growth, everybody wins. The thing about what happened in the case of Giallo here in this reaction to the N-word, whenever there are walls, whenever we learn to survive apart, work apart, study apart, imagine apart, behind the walls is ignorance and suspicion and fear and hatred and violence, because the wall limited our capacity to find security and growth. Who knows that behind that wall is someone with the capacity to figure out how to cure cancer? Who knows what special genius is behind that wall? Someone with the serum, as it were, to cure AIDS. Or some formula for world peace. Behind that wall is some Steve Jobs, orphaned, didn't finish school. Behind that wall is some Bill Gates. Behind that wall is some Martin Luther King, some Oliver Palmer. Behind that wall is some Nelson Mandela. When walls come down and bridges are built, we all become better and more secure. The move from walls to bridges is a state of trauma, because we must adjust to the new possibilities and see anew. Those behind the wall have more to offer than music, and more to offer than athletic prowess. Behind those walls are just people on both sides of the wall, with shared talents and values, who must in this world learn to live together. As we ended the legal segregation in 55, won the Montgomery bus boycott struggle, began to open up schools in 57. 1960 students came alive and sat down that in a real sense they might stand up. In 65, the Voting Rights Act was passed. Prior to that time, people of color could not vote in the most part. In the South, only blacks could not vote. White women couldn't serve on juries. Racial justice and gender equality tend to go very close one to the other. Farmers who couldn't pay poll taxes, they couldn't vote. 18-year-olds, those serving in the war, could not vote. We changed that. We learned to vote on campus. If you attend school here in Malmö, you may live in Stockholm. You can vote where you attend school, not where you live, making voting more accessible for young people. We learned to vote multinationally, more than one language. When I ran for president in 1984, I noticed that the popular vote was much greater than the delegates. That's caused a scheme where a high threshold for being a delegate and winner take all. So if I get 49.8, you get 50.2, you get 100. A way of controlling the democratic process. We changed that to proportionality. We democratized democracy. Because we changed the rules, it changed the outcome. The last election, President Barack Obama versus Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, barely won California. She barely won Texas, but she won. She barely won Ohio, She barely won Pennsylvania. Under the old rules, she would have been the winner. But democratized in democracy, President Barack was winning even as he was losing barely. He was winning and gaining. So he won because we democratized democracy. And we live with the outcome. He's president, she's Secretary of State, because they learned to coexist and not co-annihilate. We learn to live together. A greater lesson than surviving apart. And so it is today. As we take on the challenge of those on this campus or areas who insist upon using the N-word because of the I-word, ignorance, and the F-word, fear, and the H-word, hatred, and the B-word, violence. There's a tug of war. Shall you go forward by hope and inclusion, or backwards by fear and exclusion? Shall you embrace the New World Order, or try to recall the world that will never be again? Shall we go forward by hope or backwards by fear? Through all of this, you must learn to dream and to imagine beyond your present circumstance. There's this biblical story of John on the Isle of Patmos, left there to die and perish. But he dreamed of a new heaven and a new earth. The old woman passed away. He dreamed beyond his circumstances. You can be in the hole and dream of a mountaintop. You can dream beyond what it is to what it ought to be, dreaming. And dreaming to find who your neighbor really is. Is it your ethnic kin? Is it your religion? Or is it someone's behavior toward you when you're in distress? Jesus was asked one day, who is my neighbor? He gave a parable. He said, the man was walking down the street attending to his business, and through no fault of his own, was robbed, beaten, and left to die. People were frequently robbed on that corner, perhaps because there was no infrastructure to provide light where there was darkness, which made robbery more likely at that place. The beaten man lying there bleeding and dying had enough strength to see coming his way a man of his religious order, a rabbi, a minister, a reverend, a man of God. What he remembers is the man saw him bleeding, went to the other side of the street and kept walking. He must have been disappointed. He then saw another man coming of his own ethnic kin, his own racial kin. The Bible says he walked to the other side of the street and kept moving. Another man came, the Samaritan, from a different country, an immigrant, a different culture, who spoke a different language, who worshiped God differently. And he stopped and helped him up and put him on his mode of transportation and got him to recovery. Who is my neighbor? Based upon how you behave, how you care, how you love. So keep dreaming. A world where there's drinkable water for all. A world where we wipe out HIV, AIDS, and cancer. A world where we study war no more. We've lost enough money in the misadventure into Iraq to reconstruct the whole world. $1 to $3 trillion lost in Iraq, going after the wrong target. $2 billion a week in Afghanistan, $9 billion more in Libya. Succumbing to the temptation of war. There are no more winnable wars, and peace is possible and rational. And so keep dreaming. Your generation has the tools, the social media, the know-how. But that must come the moral strength to address the issues of your time and make life better. And you become better and never bitter. Peace is your choice. It's your chance. Seize it now. Go forward by hope and not backwards by fear. Thank you very much.
Question to you, Reverend. As you know, there's been an explosion with regards to right-wing parties in Europe. The right-wing parties, including in Sweden, they have a political rhetoric that always put the blame on foreigners. Everything that's wrong in Europe is because of foreigners. And this is an ongoing problem that we have in Europe. And there's, I would say, a lack of political will to tackle this problem to some extent. I would like to know what your opinion is about the development in Europe. Yes.
First of all, there's a problem around the issue of race or gender, religion. Point one, don't deny it. Number two, don't delay addressing it. And three, people of goodwill must choose their side of history. Either you join the group of fear, hatred, and violence, or the group of hope, and that's the tug of war. And the hope forces must win. Those who are neutral, in fact, give strength to those who are hateful. We, in fact, must not betray our conscience through silence. So there's a real burden upon all of us to make certain that those who feel that way are at least in the minority. You cannot extinguish them, but you can make them be the minority. Silence is betrayal. And there must be some common appreciation for a healthy dose of respect for other people. What may be a joke to me may be offensive to you. And if it's offensive to you, it's no longer a joke, because it does not have the stuff of which laughter is made. The idea that someone could be at a party in a university setting among enlightened people and do Holocaust jokes, there is no fun in Holocaust. There's no laughing dimensions of such a human tragedy. Or I can come into a room pretending to be slaves with a master selling people. There is no fun in the slave trade. There are no laughs in that, because it's comedy that covers tragedy that's too deep to laugh about. And then the fact that some one soul, some one young lady goes against the grain. Leadership often is not formed by following opinion polls, but by molding opinion. Someone says, this is not right. Though most of us are laughing, this is not right. And then conveys it to you, and you complain. You become vilified. Well, you gain your stars from your scars. Your side of history of standing against racism and bigotry will prevail. And so we thank you for standing up. But those who stand with you likewise deserve credit as well, because you can fashion the Sweden or the Europe of your dreams. Fight for a world free of racial and religious fears. That World War II, which triggered the death of 55 million people, started at a cell that grew and metastasized and became a cancer. So whenever these incidents occur, people of conscience must say no. A few days ago, there was a big attempt to discredit President Barack Obama by saying he is not a Christian. He's a Muslim. He's been roundly attacked. He's been called liar tar baby, he was not born here, a way of saying he's not one of us, a push back, a push away for those who didn't support him in the first place. And he's not a Christian. And there were among the others who saw it happening to him were silent. Then Mr. Romney is not a front runner for the Republicans, and they said, well, he is not a Christian, he's a Mormon Christian. It's the same forces that attacked President Barack Obama now have turned on him. So whenever the germs of religious or racial bigotry do occur, they must be extinguished and not allowed to grow because of silence.
Thank you very much.
My question is, how do you see the role of female or the role of women in dominant male African societies? Their role in the society and the leadership. What's your view on the future of women in diversity in steering Africa towards global recognition, so to speak?
Women in the face of male-dominated cultures must affirm their person and not surrender to male fears in the name of male strength. And in the case of Liberia, Madam Sirleaf has brought peace to a troubled country with a strength of character and reasoning. I got on the airplane the other day flying to LA, and there were 2 women pilots. The plane took off and landed safely and on time. And the women, they didn't have to carry the plane on their shoulders. They used aeronautical science. You know, gender does not fly planes. Aeronautical science flies planes. And so the argument a woman shouldn't be a pilot is just foolishness. Whoever, in the end, has the cure for cancer, you'll be a path to their doorstep. Do not let darkness threaten your light. And there has been enough evidence that there are enough women there in high places in the world to know that women must assume their rightful place as leaders, not just beside men, but to run at their own gait, their own speed, their own will to fight back. And whether it's on this campus or whether it's in Liberia, if women are Muslims or Christians, whoever has the best idea and the most will to work should prevail, not inheritance or gender.
My question is like this. From your experience as a human rights activist and having to deal with racism in the segregated South in America back in the 60s, what advice would you give to a mother whose child keep acceding when he comes home from school? Why, Mama, do you have to rub your back every evening after work? Do you just have to do cleaning and newspaper jobs? Is this the future for me? Mama, you have worked in a bank. Why can't you look for a job in the bank? While in Kenya, you worked in a bank. How hard is it to get a job?
I was jailed along with 7 classmates in 1960 trying to use a public library. And so the simple fact is you have to fight to tear down walls to build bridges. Secondly, you must tell your child, Mommy is fighting to make a better world. In this world, there are acts of evil, incivility, and violence. We must cope with them, but we must also end them. In the meantime, the law must protect your child from any act of violence. There's no simple answer on when it ends because it may never end. But teach your child to cope and not surrender. And teach your child through it all to get better and don't get bitter. And in the face of it, don't get hateful. Because hate is a form of fear in which there is no future. And so if the price you pay to take your child back and forth to school, do take the child back and forth to school. Because in the end, strong minds break strong chains. Don't let that child lose the will to get an education, because it's difficult between home and school and back.
As you notice, we are in a higher institution of education, Malmö University, and this kind of institution, they must have a role to play in creating diversity and the anti-discrimination, anti-racist work that we have. What do you think our role is? What do you think this kind of institution, what role do we have in trying to make Sweden a better country to live, regardless of your race, color, or gender? What can we do as a higher education institution?
One of the values of President Barack winning, which was such a hugely redemptive moment, was if he could become president, there's no position we cannot hold. If he can lead the nation, we can lead Harvard and Yale. And so if that be true, then the first thing, it lifts our aspiration and our dream level. So in your diversity, you must one day dream of having an immigrant or a person of color to head the university. There must be no position on campus off limits. No position off limits. The second is we must see that, I'll look in your faces, the reason why I know Dr. King would be happy today is you look like a little United Nations. And that's the beauty of your being together. There may be some tensions between Africans from different parts of Africa, Iraqis, Palestinians, Israelis, as the case may be. But it is in that learning how to cope that you're becoming educated. It's learning how to relate to what's fair, what's unfair, what's offensive, what's not offensive. Just to be here every day. When you're overcoming color shock, you see a person of color, you don't know. Because we were taught, when I grew up, that people of color can't sit beside whites in the library, can't drink water at the same fountain, can't use the same toilet. The day Dr. King gave the speech in Washington, that day, from Texas across to Florida to Maryland, people of color couldn't use a single public toilet. My high school class couldn't take pictures along the state capitol. Dogs could. Our money was counterfeit. We could not buy ice cream at many stores. We could not use restaurants. I mean, we were taught and brainwashed in the manner of race supremacy. But we fought back and we overcame it. That's not true anymore. Because we did not give up. And we fought and won, the whole world began to change. And so I'm saying to you at this university, as I look at your faces from many places and many races, the genius of this experiment is that here you are trying to figure it out. There's no instant answer to a question. But here you are trying to figure it out. Somehow, we must overcome the threat or fear of nuclear disaster. We must close this huge gap between the banksters, which are robbing people, so often legally, and the victims of their thievery. We must figure out how to end unnecessary wars. Overcome the fear of people of a different race, gender, religion. And it's our job each day to figure it out. That's part of what the educating experiment is about, trying to figure it out. And I'm confident that we will get there because look how far we've come in such a short period of time. We are figuring out. When I look up and see an African in the parliament in Rome, or in government in London, or an African-American president, or a woman, head of state, received a Nobel Prize in Liberia. When I look at the freedom movements from Nkrumah down to Mandela, all this has taken place within the last 50 to 60 years. If we do not give up on hope, and don't give up on love, and don't give up on caring, we will prevail. God bless you.